So my talk is, good afternoon, first of all, thanks for coming. My talk is how economics and information security affects cybercrime and what this means in the context of a global recession. My name is Peter Guerra. I think this year I get the prize for the longest title at Black Hat. And we're going to look at two areas, obviously economics and information security. And then within the context of the global recession, what does it mean? So information security professionals, I think we try to address risk for our organizations and our clients, the risk of loss essentially, but we don't necessarily get to look at systemic risk, risk to all clients, all organizations. It's a really difficult thing, we really can't. But I believe we can use economics to predict where market failures and the effect of these marginal activities of cybercrime to kind of see exactly what is going on in the industry. In financial markets, the so-called invisible hand is used to show the self-regulating nature of the marketplace, or basically how they address systemic risk. But we don't really have an equivalent, in my opinion, in information security. But we can examine how these two worlds, economics and information security, intersect, what the result is, and then try and put it in the context of a global recession. I don't know if you went yesterday to Black Hat to a number of really good presentations on how information security and economics intersect. They were great talks, and now you're stuck at this one. So, full disclosure, I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as a consultant. I've been around, I've done a number of things like incident response, forensics, reverse engineering, malware, remediation, a whole bunch of stuff. I'm currently getting my MBA at Loyola College in Maryland, and I was in an economics class with my professor. We started to do a project together how to look at how the recession affects cybercrime. That grew into a larger discussion of, what are the economics that really govern the information security market and also cybercrime. So I decided to present this talk here just to kind of show what our research is, our continuing research is kind of leading us. I really believe that if we can explain why things are the way that they are, that maybe we can fix them once for all. And that's just me being an optimist, I guess. What I really would want you guys to kind of get out of this is an increasing interest in the really tight links between information security and economics. What not to get out of it, though, is comprehensive conclusions backed by scores of data and metrics. It's one of the things that we found and will show is it's very difficult to get good data on cybercrime. And it's not only difficult, it's also impossible. So we're not going to be able to come to comprehensive conclusions. This is still a work in progress. So just to start, our dilemma. I don't know if you can see this or not. I like this cartoon by Wiley. It says, accept the security breach or clean a litter box, take your pick. And it shows a little cat leaving the castle gates. I really believe that this kind of illustrates how we as security professionals are really caught between two opposing worlds of economic incentives that have essentially gone wrong. And so we started to look at, as part of this project, what are those economic incentives for the good guys? What are the incentives for the bad guys in the market? And we started to ask two questions. How do economics create perverse incentives that lead to cybercrime? What is the economic contents of information security issues? The second question is, what are the economics of cybercrime during this recession? So if we believe that cybercrime is growing as a result of perverse economic incentives, what happens when the floor drops out of the global economy? What will happen? So the relevant points are, I believe there's been a fundamental shift in the security industry just recently. Economics is shaping security more than it ever has. And very specifically, cybercrime is growing because of these perverse economic incentives created by IT market and global economic trends, the impact of certain laws in certain countries, and that the impact can be significant. And I believe we need to start addressing these particular incentives. So let's just quickly go over what we found in terms of the economic context. There's certainly three major economic principles that apply here, right? The cost-benefit principles, scarcity principles, incentives. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's also some theories that can kind of predict how the market will be for security, if you will. And then there's three target areas, that what is the IT market security failure? What does that mean, global economy and for cybercrime? And then the economic impact of certain laws. So as security professionals, we know these principles very well, right? Scarce resources force us to justify security expenditures, often in cost-benefit terms. Here's how much you will lose as a result of, or here's how much you won't lose as a result of your security investment, is often a conversation that I have with my clients in different organizations. That speaks clearly to the scarcity and the cost-benefit principle. And the incentive principle, though, I think is really the one where we need to focus a lot of data and analytics to. Compliance has tried to address the incentive principle, in my opinion. That's all I'll say about that because I work for Booz Allen. Economic theory, tragedy of the commons. So the tragedy of the commons theory essentially says that the tendency for a resource that has no price to be used until its marginal benefit falls to zero. This is the example of, there's the fisheries example from the talk from Cormac Hurley yesterday. There's so many fish and there's too many fishermen, and so eventually, because they don't actually have to, pay to breed the fish, if you will, in the wild, they'll just kind of use up that resource. So we started to look at it and started to consider, the internet as a whole as a commons for cybercrime, if you will. It has inherent value, that's true, but the cost to security is shared with all the nodes in the common. And so you can see this where the cost for each node to secure themselves has a marginal benefit to the other nodes. Everybody benefits. However, this is a little weird, the cost savings for each node to not secure themselves has marginal benefit to its own node, and everybody suffers. So essentially, if everybody decides to have perfect security all at the same time, then all of the nodes are basically on the commons benefit. But if just a couple of people decide that they would rather save that money, or their perception of saving that money, then everybody suffers. And you can see that example in, how much would you spend to protect your computer and data from compromise? You'd spend whatever you needed to. Antivirus, firewall, if you had large systems deployed, you would hopefully spend as much as you were allowed to. But how much more would you spend, the margin here, to prevent your system from attacking somebody else? The economic incentive generally isn't there. So even though by protecting your own system, the overall protection of the commons can be raised. The other economic theory that comes into play here is the lemon car market, and this is especially true for IT products. The buyer in the lemon market theory, those of you who are familiar with it, it's the buyer is unable to distinguish between a used car and a lemon, right? So you only are willing to pay the amount for a lemon, and this is all things being equal. So, if you go to buy a nice car and you think it's a lemon, you're not going to pay for more than what you think a lemon is worth. So we can see this applied to the supply side of the information security market as well. Secure products are indistinguishable from insecure ones from the buyer's perspective. You can get all of the little seals you want on a website that says, yeah, we're secure, and there's been so many instances where even those types of seals, aren't reliable. There's no way for the buyer to really know whether the product that they're buying is secure or not. So the price, therefore, drops to the level for insecure products. Security is an externality. There's little incentive for IT companies to then spend R&D dollars to ensure security. And the result is a low supply of information security in IT products. Fix the code. This is something that we obviously is known to us in the industry. But the good example of it, really, and the reason for the example of this is one that Ross Anderson brought up of Microsoft. I'm not a Microsoft basher. Hopefully they won't kick me out of their party tonight for saying this, but the economic environment of the strict competitiveness of the IT market, Microsoft in large order was able to corner it because of their ship it now, we'll fix it in revision 3 model. Their first mover advantage in IT, and there's been numerous studies on this, is huge. It's much larger in the IT market than in any other market currently out there. The first mover is important because the market develops so rapidly, so much more rapidly on an order of magnitude than any other market. So this is for, unfortunately, means that security is often, revision 1 is left by the wayside. And they have to operate, Microsoft does have to operate within the economic context of their industry, just like everybody else. So it makes sense for them to have picked this type of model, but unfortunately, it points to, some of the issues that we have with the security in them. So in general, what the research was showing us was the IT market has little incentive to properly and thoroughly incorporate security into her products. It's called a market failure. Whenever there's a market failure in economics, we all know that that creates market opportunity. There's two opportunities there. The security product industry, all the vendors on the fourth floor here who have stepped in to fix the problem with the market in general. But then also there's the other side of it, the shadow economy of the cybercrime. And since cybercrime can be profitable, has very little overhead and little risk of being prosecuted, there's a real market opportunity for cybercrime to take advantage of this. You know, it leaves a gaping hole is kind of what we saw. There's a huge opportunity cost for criminals to not operate into the cyber realm. And it's interesting because it kind of is, we see the same thing in the physical world of the Somalian pirates. You know, this is a graphic, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, from Wired. You know, the typical Somali earned about $600 a year in fishing or farming or other type of those types of things. But even the lowliest pirate can make about 17 times that, $10,000 in a single hijacking. Granted, it's high risk, but the risk is relative to them. Because in Mogadishu, there's a civil war that's been going on, you know, thousands of people have been killed. The economic incentives for the shippers, the insurers, and so forth for a long time was to simply ignore the problem. It was cheaper to pay the ransom than lose the cargo for them, and they did a cost-benefit analysis. Result is that the graph shows here that the pirate industry has completely exploded in that region. And it's starting to get a lot more attention now, I think, because it has gotten so serious. And then the yellow in there is showing the 2008 attacks on certain pirates. So, you know, that relates specifically to where we find ourselves with cybercrime. The biggest issue we've had so far with doing the study that we're doing is it's difficult and impossible to get really good data, like I said before. You know, the indicators tend to be of how big the problem is of cybercrime, and the economics that rule it tend to be at the margins. You know, what are the byproducts of cybercrime? So how much are things bought and sold for on the market? So Carter's markets or identities and so forth. You know, what are the sophistication of the tools, and how is the sophistication growing? Is it getting, you know, more sophisticated? Is it flat? Is it getting less sophisticated, if that's possible? The size and number of botnets, and then also the specialization also points to maturity in these types of markets. And this is very similar to the illegal drug trade, and no one really knows how big that drug trade really is, but you can sketch it out somewhat. You can get a kind of a thumb view on, you know, how many kilos are seized, how many addicts check in fact that they're building submarines to transport the drugs in the Gulf of Mexico, which is just amazing. It shows specialization and does indicate the growth. Same with cybercrime. The other issue we had with the study that so far as it's going on is, you know, the definitions can be difficult. Usually cybercrime is broken down by, you know, activities, you know, what happens, or the loss. So phishing leads to botnets, to identity theft. And the other thing is some studies have lumped in copyright infringement with this, and that's a very difficult number. You know, I know the RIAA has their opinion on how much loss that they have as a result of copyright infringement, but I think we would all agree that's probably inflated. So it's very difficult to find out exactly what constitutes it. As an example, here's a GAO report from 2007 that we pulled out that has estimated loss for cybercrime everywhere from like $100 billion in 1 year down to $68 million. So it's wildly different amounts. It's very difficult to get a good thumb on it. Another example, you know, there's examples of the economics of spam and botnets. You know, how much a spammer and a botnet herder actually makes as a result of their activities. Something on the order of $12,000 a week is essentially what they pulled out. This is from a study in 2008, so these numbers could be different by now. So it's really interesting to see how people are trying to define how big the cybercrime market is without good numbers to back it up. And the GA report says the precise magnitude is unknown. What I posited, and we're positing in our report, in our paper, is it's less important how big the market is than how fast the market has grown and why. What are the economic incentives essentially the fuel on the fire for that. And there's examples of speed. There's the quote that cybercrime is moving at such a high speed that law enforcement cannot catch up with it. Much misaligned and misquoted quote, but it gets to the heart of the fact that these people are specializing and they're growing at such a rate that it's difficult for us to really even measure. Those margins to show the speed, the increasing specialization of cybercrime. There's botnet rentals and carding templates and machines. The swiftness of responding to world events is getting to be within, it seems like minutes, right? 2008, banks were failing. They were sending out all kinds of malware in their documents saying, hey, Bear Stearns is going under. See if you're going to be affected. Click on this link or download this file. And Michael Jackson death, it seemed like they released things hours. And then, of course, the Aaron Andrews peephole video, it seemed like it was seconds or minutes after that story broke that these types of cybercrime campaigns were going out. Their costs tend to be minimal, which shows a little bit also about the points to the speed. So, you can buy them for $500. Botnet rentals are about, for millions of nodes, about $1,000 a day. You can get 6 cents for each infected machine from mindframedollars.biz. There's all kinds of models. This is from an FAQ from a crimeware site that I pulled that said, for $50 for 3 months, we'll host your Zeus Trojan and Malkit. It's really exploding. And I'm going to skip this one so we can go get some ice cream in a minute. So the growth rate in malware is also another way that you can look as the byproduct and the margin of what is going on with cybercrime, why is it growing so fast? This is from a semantic report, and it does show, look at the growth since just 2003, right? We're talking a period of about 5 years. It's almost 1,000-fold from the number of malicious code signatures. Now, granted, in this is polymorphic code examples. Malicious code has gotten much more sophisticated, and so these numbers are kind of more difficult to come by because it's actually, these are the signatures you would need in order to detect all variants of one particular type of code. So it's difficult to get at again. So first, you have to see that these perverse economic incentives have created an IT product market with little incentive to incorporate security. That's the market failure. And the market capitalization of that is that the cybercrime uses it for profit motives. So the second question is, what happens then when the global economy collapses? What is this impact on cybercrime, which is global in nature? This is what we're trying to answer. And it's difficult. So this is a map of the current state of recession. Recession being 2 quarters of negative gross domestic product growth, so negative growth in a country. And you can see here that this is a global recession. And this is pulled from a Wall Street Journal article a couple of months ago, so these numbers might have changed some. And we were saying, what is the impact then in this global recession? The job loss, disgruntled worker, inside threat could increase. So it points to it with a profit motive, that's cost benefit. There's a rise in available computer talent with no job. Cybercrime can pay. And I know that they made the point yesterday at the Microsoft research briefing, Cormac Harley, that low wage jobs pay low wages, but in some cases, like we saw the Somali pirates, low wage is okay in some countries. You have to survive somehow, and this could be a means to do it, especially if you have computer skills and hey, you find yourself without a job. There's increased demand always during global recession for counterfeit products, believe it or not, and there's some good data to back that up. There's scarcity, hey, I don't have a job anymore, but I need these drugs to survive. I'll take the chance that maybe I wouldn't before. And then of course, there's the ability that you wouldn't necessarily be able to prosecute. You'd have more limited resources, right? Everybody is, when a global recession happens or any recession happens, everybody has less that they're able to spend on, right? Cost benefit analysis means that, so there's the possibility that there's less money to spend on security even as this threat would grow. Cost benefit analysis means that less security possibly can lead to more cybercrime, and that's kind of what we're starting to see. So on the other hand though, businesses look at it as, what business is there to protect if we're in chapter 7? If we spend too much to protect ourselves and yet we lose our business in this economy, it's a difficult thing to kind of to measure. So, the best example that we could find so far is fraud numbers. Level of fraud during this economic global recession has increased. They're calling it about a 2% increase. It's about $500 billion annually is what they're estimating. I'm not sure exactly what was in that number. This was from a report in CSO magazine. Thank you. And it's hard to tell how they come up with that number, if they include like lost productivity and a whole bunch of other types of things like that. But in general, they're seeing at least a 2% increase in fraud, which points to that. The other thing is globalization and how this global recession and our globally connected economies that we have, for the first time, they're all kind of affecting each other. So from previous recessions, or even the Depression in the 30s, the 50s, the 80s, and 90s, the world was not as connected economically that it currently is. The integration of these national economies into an international economy through trade, foreign direct investment, capital flows, and technology, spread of technology, can really impact the amount that cybercrime can have on a global scale for the first time. So, are emerging markets, the so-called BRIC nations, more vulnerable to cybercrime or more vulnerable to conduct cybercrime? And there's some interesting semantic things that they have came out with that showed, different countries and their malicious activity by country. So, looking into this has led to many, many other questions. What is the full impact to us as security professionals? It's very difficult to measure. Does it make our jobs harder? Do we get to keep our jobs in these type of economies? If you're wondering about that, come and see me afterwards. What is the impact on security innovation? The demand for security products might be there, but guess what? There's less money to buy these types of things. What's going to happen, especially in the financial markets, that Mark McGovern was telling me about. They have a lot of money that they need to spend on these types of things. What happens when that goes away? What is the impact on governments? Cyber warfare just became super cheap. I can rent this botnet instead of having to create my own information warfare thing, and to businesses and so forth. And so the conclusion is, without the data, really, we can only guess. Cybercrime is an economic issue, and it's growing because of these perverse economic incentives created by the IT market. I do believe that this fundamental shift in the industry, the economics is shaping it more, warrants more research, and really good data would be the best start. So this is still a work in progress. This is still a lot of concepts we're trying to wrestle with. So any comments, flames, or otherwise comments are more than welcome. And that concludes my talk. I want to thank you for coming.